Mayi, Arpita, Manobuddhiḥ. It literally means, if you see it on the screen, word by word, Mayi means to me. Arpita Manobuddhiḥ is mind and intellect devoted to me. And this is a powerful subject because often when we talk about Vedanta, we highlight the buddhi, which is the intellect. And we keep on saying about the importance of developing the intellect. And in this topic, in this quality, it talks about the importance of having both mind and intellect dedicated to me. So let's examine firstly the me. In this context, the me is said by Lord Krishna. And there are those who take it literally. They think that they are referring to the personality Lord Krishna, that worship Lord Krishna. But that's not the idea. Because for these great saints, for these great teachers, they've completely changed their identity from the personality, from that profession, from that particular title. They've changed it to the self. So they've completely identified with that consciousness. They've completely identified with that God principle. So when they say dedicated to me, they're not talking about Sudhakar. They're not talking about the personality. They're talking about the self within. And because they've fully merged with that, when they say me, it's talking about the quality of a devotee is to be completely dedicated with your mind and intellect to God, to the self, to the spirit within. This is it. So we have highlighted in the past development of the intellect. Here it says it's incomplete if you don't have the mind. Every human being is made up of the material aspect, which is your body, your mind, and your intellect. So in the diagram, the body is the vehicle that performs the actions, but it's the mind and intellect that does the thinking. And depending on which equipment you use, that will determine the quality of your action. So if the action is backed by the mind, it means there is desire, like and dislike, emotion, feeling backing the action. If it is backed by thought, analysis, reasoning, awareness, then it's backed by the intellect. Now it's saying here in this quality. Earlier we spoke about self-control, so it was intellect managing the mind. But in this quality, it says intellect and mind together. And the word for this is confluence. It's the merging of emotion and thinking towards a particular goal. In fact, when our mind and intellect work in harmony, what a life. Imagine if what we like to do is also what we think we should do, is what we ought to do. So often, when we think about work, we think about work as something that needs to be done. It's necessary. Imagine if you enjoy your work, if you look forward to work, as you do a game of golf, or to go for a swim, or to go to the beach, or to go to a holiday destination. Imagine if you looked at work as your rest. So the feeling is enjoyment, but the intellect also, this is what needs to be done. What a life. What is the opposite of that? What happens if the mind and intellect disagree? Feel free to unmute and answer.
Emotion.
Did you say emotion?
Yes.
Emotion, yes. What type of emotion? They'll be saying stress.
Yes, stress. Yeah.
If the mind really wants something and the intellect says, not a good idea, your analysis, your thinking says, not a good idea, you get conflict in the personality. Sureka, agitation. And this conflict and agitation within your personality is because your feeling and your thinking don't align. If we want to progress in the spiritual path, we have to find a way to get our feeling to feel what we are thinking, but also our thinking to understand what we're feeling. And this is the confluence. The mind and intellect working in harmony. So when we talk about spiritual goals, it's about having that devotion to the idea of self-realization, to feel it. We have just concluded a retreat in Prague, and it's intensive. We did chapter 3 of the Bhagavad Gita, and it's the Czech community. So many are very familiar with Vedanta because we've been coming here since 2017, but there were quite a few new people. And each year we try and add a different layer from the Vedanta Academy schedule into our Prague weekend retreat. And this year, we did bhajans. For those of you who don't know what bhajans are devotional compositions. They're Indian hymns, songs, pieces that are expressly composed and sung with the idea of raising our emotions to the higher. So can you imagine? In this Czech community, on the outskirts of Prague, we are playing bhajans full blast. And we really didn't know what to expect, whether the audience would be able to engage. And we told them, don't worry about the words, because including myself, I don't know the meaning of all the bhajans. But it's not about the meaning. That is analysis. That is what the intellect is for. In this exercise, when we are listening to the bhajans of the music, it's actually about the feeling and giving an opportunity for the mind to soar, for the mind to start feeling what during that whole weekend retreat we've been analyzing. And when these two go together, you get the cooperation, you get tailwind. Tailwind means you have the wind in your sails, you have the wind behind you. Now, if you go against your nature or if you go against your mind, it's a headwind. So everything is that much more difficult, that much harder. It doesn't have to be, because we don't have to be that firm with our mind. We don't have to be that rigid with our mind. It's important to figure out. Just as a parent with a child, the intellect's got to figure out how to talk to our mind. You go too harsh, the mind rebels. You go too soft, the mind takes control. So figuring out the customized angle and way of speaking to your mind, and that's why not every angle that I mention may work on you. You've got to customize it because you know your mind the best. It requires so much of self-awareness, so much of maturity in understanding how your thinking works, how your mind works, how strong your desires are, and what to tell your mind to inspire it towards higher. So what would you suggest to bring about this confluence? How can we get the mind and intellect to start working together? Think about the careers that you're in. So it doesn't have to be only spiritual goal, even exercise. How do you get the mind and the intellect to work together for exercise? We know we need to do it. We know that the importance of it, nutrition, to eat the right type of food. We understand with the intellect how to get the mind to cooperate.
Pause before taking an action and try to figure out if it's the mind or the intellect.
Okay, pausing. Just do the work. How do we get the mind to say, I also want to do this?
Can I say?
Sure.
Can we say feel the feelings and check if there's any resistance and try to work it?
Feel the feelings, analyze the reason for the resistance. Great.
Right.
Yeah,
and try to work the resistance.
Yeah. So this is so important because, in our diagram of body, mind, intellect, a sophisticated intellect does not ignore the mind. It takes the mind into its consideration. It takes the mind into its analysis, how you're feeling, but possibly what others are feeling. So even in a lecture where it's highly intellectual, there's a thought flow, there's a message that's meant to be conveyed, I use the mind a lot to feel what the audience is feeling in order to have some adaptability in the lecture to know to adjust the message. Maybe the concept needs another example, or it needs a story, or I need to lighten it because it's getting too heavy. It's feeling the mood. So the intellect needs to take the mind into consideration. So that's why what you mentioned there about feel the feelings, listening to what the mind is saying is an important, but also noting the resistance. Why the resistance? Analyzing that. Okay. Any other answers?
Do something that brings joy.
Do something that brings joy. Great. Let's delve into that one. One of the reasons why we highlight the importance of when you choose a field of activity, including the spiritual path, it should be in line with your nature. It should be in line with your likes and dislikes, your preferences, your desires. That is called swa-dharma. Swa means one's own, dharma means nature. And if you choose a field that's in line with what you like to do, so suppose you enjoy sport, you enjoy playing tennis. Suppose tennis is your career. You look forward to practice. But if you've been forced to play tennis because perhaps your parents see it as very lucrative and they forced you to get into it, there are famous tennis players. They started so early, and either because of the way they approached the sport, or it wasn't really their swadharma or their idea. Martina Hingis, she won so many Grand Slams, retired at 22. Why do you retire at 22? Because fed up, not enjoying it. Swadharma is something that you look forward to. It's something that when you're doing, you don't feel the time pass. It's something that you want to research, you want to watch YouTube videos on, you can keep listening to. It's a tailwind in your personality. There's a support. The opposite of swadharma is paradharma. It's an alien nature. So this is when you completely go against your mind. You do an activity, but you have to force yourself. So it needs double the time, double the application, double the effort. And that's why we find it so exhausting, because it's not our nature. It's an alien nature. We're going against our personality. So first thing is choose to go along with the nature, at least the general field. Now, in the general field, not everything is going to be in our nature. Sometimes we may have to do accounts, taxes. You might say, that's not my nature, but that's okay, part of the field. You have to do a little bit of it. So the general nature has got to be taken care of, so your mind is at peace. Your nature is not suppressed. What's the next factor? The next factor is the why, is that higher ideal. And that higher ideal or the goal is the purpose for why you work. Often when we work, and we do quite a few corporate seminars in this tour, and when we're asking the team members, why did you choose this company? Why are you working? 95% say, for the salary, pay the bills, manage my lifestyle. But that is a very small circle. That's just working for yourself. That is just working for you, the small ego. Expand the circle to something larger. If you see this circles of identification, expand it to the next level. You work for the family. That gives you initiative to work. You get inspired to work for the family. You're actually doing perhaps extra hours. If you're working for the community, you find it ends up going on to the weekend. There's no weekday, weekend. It's all one continuous flow. If you are inspired by the country, you find there are some true patriots, nationalists. There's no difference between their work and their rest. Everything that they're doing is for their country. Similarly with human beings. It doesn't matter the boundary. It doesn't matter where you're from. All human beings can benefit. Could be, like for this subject, from this knowledge. So you are inspired to share it with all human beings. So you've got to find the goal or the circle or the purpose that inspires you. Now, if that goal is too high, your mind thinks this is unrealistic. I'm not very inspired by. But also if it's too low, too easy, your mind finds it too simple. So you've got to find a goal that is a little bit beyond the circle that you're at presently. So if you're at community, expand it a little bit more than the community. If you're at family, expand it a little bit more than family. If you are at company, let your company be something bigger. Not just for the team, but also for the clients. But not just for the clients, maybe even to showcase the country. So some companies have made their countries famous. Change the ideal, but it must inspire you. And if it doesn't inspire you, so it sounds very great, it sounds like something that you would put in your website to advertise the company, to show that you're sustainable, that you are doing wonderful things for the world. But if you are not personally inspired by it, it does not work. You've got to believe in it. So, Swadharma. Choose the field in line with your activity. Find a goal or a purpose that inspires you to be better. Then, having done that, we are ready to have both the mind and intellect be in confluence. You know it's the right thing to do, working towards that goal, but your mind is also inspired by the goal. So there are days when the mind is not cooperating. It's feeling a little bit lazy. It's feeling a little bit stuck. So the remembrance of the goal, the intellect tells the mind, hey mind, remember this is our mission. This is what we're doing here. And the mind gets charged. Okay, come on, let's go. And perhaps the attitude to take when the intellect talks to the mind is more of educational, like bringing the mind along until it is also just doing what needs to be done. So there's a little bit of effort because the mind enjoys certain other things. It's not quite yet on the path of your goal. So that's the effort of pulling the mind along, but do it with education, slowly, surely. And for those of you who've been in this subject for some time, try kindness. Being kind to your mind. I learned this phrase from Avanya, duvet day. Duvet day is sometimes it's tough, life is a little bit difficult, so people take a duvet day. They're in bed for an extra amount of time. It may require that. If you feel that the mind is really not cooperating, give it some time, give it some space. Don't force it. But duvet day should not become every day. Duvet week. This is duvet month. I'm taking a duvet year. 2025 is my duvet year. So there we have to be careful. And it's understanding when the mind is really battling and when the mind is just being bratish. But the kindness helps the mind not rebel. Because it's the intellect telling the mind, look, I understand you. I understand where you're coming from. I understand your resistance. But let's try it. We really want that goal. Come on, let's work for it. So this is it. Now, if you see this diagram here, it's a ladder. Not a beautifully done ladder, but it conveys the point. Each one of us are somewhere on a different rung of the ladder. Okay? All right, so you might be on the second rung of the ladder. If you're on the second rung, how do you climb a ladder? You're on the second rung. What is the next step?
At a time.
Sorry?
One step at a time,
One step at a time. Okay, so a step you would do with the feet, right? So the first thing is to reach out with one arm. You put the one arm on the ladder, okay? Until the one arm is on the higher rung, you can let go of one foot. Now, if you let go of both feet, you fall. Okay, so you can't push beyond that. First, you've got to have one hand on the higher. And when you have the second hand on the higher, you can step up. Now, this process of climbing, you have to be careful because until you are consolidated, you have a strong grip on the higher, there's going to be that opportunity or that chance to fall back. And this is what happens with our mind and intellect. So our intellect is going towards that higher goal. It's saying, let me try waking up in the morning, doing my morning studies, my Vedanta, my self-reflection, my me time. And you've got a value for it. It's a higher value. And you've reached out, but your mind is not quite there. It's not yet established. So in this interim time, you've got to keep on putting the effort until you're solid. You've got both hands on, which means you've become consolidated, established in that. Your mind knows the value of the early morning. The mind values the early morning as much as the intellect wants to wake up. And then what happens? Friends might invite you for a dinner or a late night, and both your intellect and mind have no problem saying, sorry, not tonight. Can't make it. But otherwise, if a friend invites you over, the mind is saying, oh, that's amazing. I would love to. And the intellect is not a good idea. Remember the early mornings. Conflict. And that's where the effort is. So that effort is in that interim until you become established, consolidated. in the spiritual path, that consolidation where the mind is with you, it wants the goal of self-realization, it wants evolution, and your intellect is fully convinced that that is where happiness is, that is where peace is, that's when you fly. And there's a line from Rabindranath Tagore's Gitanjali, and I got reminded of Rabindranath Tagore because he's a person who visited Prague. And the ambassador, the Indian ambassador here, he was telling me how there's a statue and a road named after Tagore here in Prague. And he says this, and I felt it's a perfect statement conveying the confluence. That I want thee, only thee, let my heart repeat without end. All desires that distract me day and night are false and empty to the core. So the mind is saying that I want thee, only thee. You don't know if he's talking about a lover or he's talking about God. But it's the thee, he uses it as the higher because it's talking about all other desires, false and empty to the core. That I want thee is the mind. Let my heart repeat without end. But the memory of all desires that don't take me towards you, I do not want, that's the intellect. That's the focus. Now, in the spiritual path, it's not either jnana yoga or bhakti yoga. It's not knowledge or devotion. It is all three yogas. We've got to practice it in proportion to our personality. If you're active, to that extent, do karma. But the devotional part of you, and each one of us has some emotional aspect, cater to it with devotion. And the intellectual aspect with knowledge. That's what we're doing now. And there's no meaning in arguing with each other about spiritual and religious doctrine, because the goal is the same. It's peace and bliss. So whatever makes sense, perhaps from another ideology, take that, use it for your evolution. If another person is open and they're requesting you for a point of view, share with them. Maybe it helps them. And in one of the poems selected by Swamiji, it's called The Nightingale and the Glowworm. And it talks about how there was a nightingale and the nightingale was hungry and it had been singing the whole day, sort of starving. And it looks around for a meal. And it's twilight time, so the light is fading, but it spots a glowworm because of the glow. And it swoops down to eat the glowworm. And the glowworm says, hang on, give me a minute. And says this beautiful monologue. So I'll put it up on the screen for you. And this is what the glowworm tells the nightingale. It says, did you admire my lamp, quoth he, as much as I, your minstrelsy, means your song? You would abhor to do me wrong, as much as I to spoil your song. For 'twas the self-same power divine taught you to sing and me to shine, that you with music, I with light, shall beautify and cheer the night. The whole idea is this night is the darkness that we're in. We're ignorant of the self. And that's why we're in all this turmoil. If you know the self, you cannot but be fulfilled, happy, light. So instead of arguing with each other, instead of having a complex, look, you're so emotional, use the advantages of being emotional. Or looking at somebody and saying, look, you're so academic, you're not practical. Use the advantages of being intellectual. And combine the two. That you with music, I with light, might beautify and cheer the night. The songster heard his short oration, and warbling out his approbation, released him, as my story tells, and found a supper somewhere else. The second part, he says, and this is the message: hence, jarring sectaries may learn, their real interest should discern, that brother should not war with brother, and worry and devour each other, but sing and shine by sweet consent, till life's poor transient night is spent, respecting in each other's case the gifts of nature and of grace. We've got a mind and an intellect. A human being is a feeling and a thinking being. Use both for our peace, for our evolution, for our purpose, self-realization. If you are only intellect-sided and you neglect the mind, you become a professor. And these professors, those in academia, they take all the joy out of philosophy. And I can understand why students, after studying philosophy in university, do not take to the subject. So dry. You become a professor. So you need the mind. But if you are only mind and no intellect at all, no reasoning, you become fanatic. You become rigid, not tolerant, not accepting, not open to other ideas, other beliefs, other things that may help. But if you have the two, you're able to remove the darkness. You're able to cut through the ignorance. Swamiji gives an example that the spiritual path is like sawing through a steel plate. And you're cutting with a saw of knowledge. So the knowledge is what's cutting through the ignorance. But you try it and you can't do it. But if you just add the oil of devotion, a little bit of lubrication, it cuts through the steel plate. So the saw of knowledge with the oil of devotion cuts through the steel of ignorance. This is the quality of confluence. Mind and intellect devoted to a higher ideal, to me representing self-realization. So if you have any questions, please make a note of them. We're going to open it up for Q&A in a few minutes. Before we do that, let's take up the question for the week. So the question selected this week is, we're getting more familiar with the terminologies that we use in Vedanta. What does it mean to turn introvert? How does turning introvert give you peace? To turn introvert means to turn your attention, to turn your interest from outside to inside. Outside to inside is relative. So outside could be other people, outside could be your family, and turning within means going closer. So you're going within to yourself. Instead of others' behavior, your behavior. Instead of correcting the world, to correcting yourself. But when you say within, do you mean your home, your external environment? It could mean that. Start with your environment, your immediate environment. Start with outside. One of the activities that we have is campus cleanup in the academy, where we start with the outer environment. Okay, let's clean our home. Take care of that. But then you're cleaning your home. What about your body? Your nails, your hair? You take care of that. But then what about your organs? Does it have all sorts of intoxicants inside? Are the arteries blocked? We clean this up. Then what about what's deeper than that? Anyone? What's deeper than cleaning out the arteries, the colon? Shakila said the mind. What about our desires? What about our negative tendencies? What about our negative thoughts, negative habits? We've got to clean those out. Our follies. All that is at an internal level, and you keep going deeper and deeper. So if you have a look at this diagram, it shows the outer layers to the inner layers. So turning introvert means going within, but how deep do you go? So if you turn from taking care of external things, so maybe the facade is wonderful, but what about inside the facade? Okay, so we're worried about the home being beautiful. What about the people living in the home? So that's turning introvert. Let's worry about the inhabitants, not just the building. But then within the inhabitants, what about the bodies? Is everybody healthy? So you work on nutrition. Turn further introvert. And you start taking care of, see, the food sheet is the nutrition. The vital areas, am I breathing well? Is all my vital areas working beautifully? Okay. But more important than that, if we go deeper, is everything's taken care of, but they're not happy. And that's the mental part. The mental part, intellectual part, deeper than that, vasana. You're changing the root. From the vasanas comes everything else. And if you go completely introvert, you keep x-raying through the personality, you keep going deeper and deeper into the personality, you hit the core, you hit the self within. Now, why does turning introvert give you peace? Simply because that self, the core, is the source of peace, bliss. So when you turn within rather than without, you're moving immediately towards peace. But when you go out, you're going further and further away from that source of peace and bliss. Every step you take within, you get closer and closer to uncovering, reaching the self, the core of your personality, the consciousness that is the substratum of everything. That's where the bliss is. On a relative note, why turning introvert gives us peace is because the moment we blame outside objects and people for our inner peace, we give away our control. So you're putting the remote control of your peace of mind in somebody else's hand. So what happens in the news can disturb you. Why? Because you've given the news the remote control of your peace. You've given a family member, by saying something, the ability to go play pause on your peace of mind. Say, okay, let's agitate the person now. Play. Oh, let's really agitate them. ×2. Ooh, let's see what ×10 looks like. Take that remote back. How? By taking accountability. And you take accountability when you turn introvert, and instead of blaming others for your unhappiness or your mistakes, you start looking at yourself. What could I have done differently in this discussion? Is there any way I could have avoided this outcome? What can I change in my thinking to be better prepared in the future? When we do this, we take control, we take accountability, we move from victim to master, we get peace of mind. Therefore, turning introvert is the journey towards the self, where the source of peace is. But it also helps you take control, because that's the only thing that you can control. You can't control outside. And there too, you also find greater peace. What does it mean to turn introvert? Going within. How does one turning introvert give you peace? It helps you move towards the source of bliss within, the self, and it puts you in the driving seat of life. Now we take up questions. Any questions?
Does turning introvert not make one more selfish?
Mala, right?
Yes. Sorry, I can't get my video on.
Sure. So, turning introvert does not mean that you neglect your external or your duties to others. It changes your motivations why you do them. So, turning introvert, when we use the word introvert, sometimes it's used generally as being shy or being within yourself. That's not what we mean. Turning introvert here means, where do you look for happiness? Where do you look for answers? Where do you look for peace? So if you take care, if you nurture and develop within, that becomes love, peace, radiating outwards. So if we try to be loving externally, it only lasts for a little while, right? Because we're putting on an act, or we're trying to be charitable. But when you work internally on being loving or becoming charitable, then once you become that, then you just radiate it outside. So no, it actually has the opposite effect. By going introvert, you become more and more unselfish. So a person who only thinks about the body is maximum selfish. But a person who thinks about the mind starts thinking about his family, their family, becomes more unselfish. If you identify with the intellect, you think about anybody who shares the same concepts as you, you become more unselfish. And if you identify with the self, you see the self everywhere, in everyone. You are selfless, or universal love.
Thank you. That makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, next question. Yes, Sonia.
Yes, you spoke a little bit about tailwinds and headwinds. So tailwinds is when you're in confluence. But headwinds, can you explain a little bit more about that, and why we should focus more on the tailwinds?
Sure. So when the mind and intellect are working against each other, you don't get the alignment in your personality. So it is like walking a dog, and you are trying to take the dog for a walk, but the dog does not want to walk in the direction you want. In fact, it's pulling you behind. So you're walking in one direction, the dog is pulling you behind. You're not moving. Or either the dog starts pulling you, or you start pulling the dog. But it's so slow. But if you and the dog are in sync, you get distance covered, you move very quickly. Now, the same thing with your mind. If the mind is cooperating with you, you move quickly, you fly quickly, you enjoy it. There is less loss of energy. But if, and this is your question, if there's a headwind, it means you're going against your mind. So the mind doesn't want to do it. The intellect is saying, come on, let's do it. So you will find there maximum energy dissipation because of the mind's resistance. You're trying to move something that doesn't want to be moved. And you can force it, you can push it with your intellect. And sometimes we may have to, but it requires a great deal of energy. It requires a great deal of overcoming resistance, which the tailwind doesn't have, that extra support. So the frustration, the loss of energy, the dissipation, these happen when there is conflict, intellect versus mind, versus confluence, which is mind with intellect. Is that okay?
Perfect. That's exactly what I needed. Thank you.
Okay. So think about the areas where in your life where you do not have this confluence, where you have a higher value, but you're not consistent in it. The mind makes excuses, things that do not really matter, you end up doing, and the things that you would like to prioritize end up being neglected. Why is that the case? Why isn't the mind cooperating? And when we start doing this kind of self-analysis, we are able to see, understand the mind's reluctance. And if you're able to understand the mind's reluctance, we can find ways of getting the mind to prioritize. So I remember one elderly person, the family has been suggesting that she work on her health, prioritize the health, and for that person as well, they're extremely well read. They know the nutrition they need. They know the exercise that is required. But the mind just gravitates to all the things the mind likes, right? The biscuits, the chips, etc. And the mind gravitates towards that. And of course, some days it's cold, definitely don't want to go out, exercise. Until the person was able to find the higher ideal, the reason. And I'm telling you, because I found it so amusing. The higher ideal was, I want to be able to play with the grandchildren. And that higher ideal, to be fit to enjoy the grandchildren, change the nutrition, change the schedule, change the exercise, change the lifestyle. Now, what it is for your mind, you've got to figure out. I never would have thought of that reason. Perhaps because I don't have strong desire to play with grandchildren. But we've got to find our reason by understanding our mind. And this is the idea. So think about the different areas. What's holding you back? Why aren't you achieving at the rate you'd like to achieve? Why aren't you changing at the rate you'd like to change? Why aren't you practicing what you know or convinced in? What's missing? And what is that gap? To pull that mind up the ladder, to get it consolidated, to get it established. What do we need? We need alignment, swadharma. We need higher knowledge. So we've got to convince this mind that it's the higher goal. And then the mind will follow. Why will the mind follow? Why eventually the mind will follow? It'll take some time. So the dog, if you're walking the dog will follow. Why will the mind follow at some point?
I think because of the excitement. Can you hear me?
Yes, it's
Oh,
clear.
because initially I tried to comment, you couldn't hear me. That's
Mhm.
fine. I think it's because of the excitement that you create, so that feeling, and now understands why it's important. Like the example that you're making, I've also seen it waking up in the morning, once you talk to my mind and say, actually, what in the morning is my free time, is my freedom. I take control of my thoughts and my day. I become stronger when I'm alone and I think through my day. It helps me. So once I talk about my taking back my freedom, my mind wakes up. Once I talk about liberation, if I wake up in the morning, my day will be liberated. I will be victorious and I will win better. Then I'm telling you, I won't even wake up at 4. By 3 a.m., somehow I'll be out of bed. Because I just want to make sure that no one takes control of my day.
Excellent. So you have found the key words that your mind is inspired by. Liberation, freedom. For some, it might be independence. So you've
Yes.
understood what the mind values and you use that to propel you. Why the mind will ultimately always follow you is because the mind is looking for bliss. It is looking for happiness. But the problem with the mind is it gravitates towards instant pleasure. But if you offer it something higher, something better, it doesn't know it yet. So that's why it doesn't go for it. So you've got to bridge that gap where it starts experimenting with that higher value, and it takes time, but getting the mind to cooperate until it tastes enough of the higher value to understand, you know what? This is better bliss than the lower one. I want this. So the mind will leave behind the lower rung of the ladder because the higher rung has more happiness. And that's what the mind is looking for. So if we are doing this path right, self-realization is the source of bliss. And if we can get the mind to taste just the next level, and if it tastes it enough, it will want to leave the lower, take up the higher. If you see this pyramid diagram, it shows the hierarchy of pleasure and bliss. Sensual pleasure, no doubt, can give you X amount of pleasure. But the trouble with sensual pleasure is, whilst it's instant, it's also very short-lived, right? So it gives you a hit and it goes, doesn't last. And it also has a diminishing value. Emotional pleasure gives you more pleasure than sensual pleasure. So for instance, someone gives you a chocolate, you may decide not to eat it, but share it with your daughter or your son, because you get more pleasure from your family member enjoying it than you actually physically having it. Same thing, intellectual pleasure is higher. And this is why the path of introversion, this is why it gives us more peace. Intellectual pleasures give us even greater satisfaction. So when a concept clicks in you, when an understanding happens in you, the pleasure that it gets, it's like an epiphany. It just crystallizes. But the highest pleasure is when you experience the self, the spirit. That pleasure you don't come back from. It's incredible. And this is why so many are inspired towards self-realization, because it's a pleasure that lasts. And every step you take towards it, you experience a greater peace. So, the reason why the mind will eventually follow you, if you're able to guide the mind, convince the mind to try out higher, because as soon as it tastes that higher and understands that this is greater pleasure, it will drop the lower, be consolidated in that level. And it fluctuates. It's not yet consolidated in the next higher rung because it's not fully convinced of the pleasure. It's still enjoying the pleasure of the current level. And that's where the intellect needs that convincing, that kindness, that motivation to say, mind, come on, let's try this. We want to wake up for freedom. We want to wake up for liberation. So, some questions. There's a question here. Sudhakar, how can you use introvert if duties are not done every time by the persons outside of you? Okay, so it's the usage of the words introvert and extrovert. So introvert is how you manage your reaction. Where do you look for your peace and happiness? If you're looking outside, we are going to be very stressed, very disappointed, because we blame the world, we blame the parents, we blame others for everything. I am the way I am because of my parents. I am the way I am because of the stars. I am the way I am because of all sorts of external factors. So are you going to be a victim your whole life? But if you turn introvert, you say, hang on, what's in my power? How can I change my thinking? That means being introvert. Introvert does not mean not responding to the world, not relating to the world, not taking care of your duties. It means you operate from a deeper level of your personality. That is being introvert. Lakshmi, my question, is being both extrovert and introvert a good thing in life? Again, so Lakshmi, the understanding here is that extrovert means that we need to express in the world. And being introvert means being with yourself. You can be extremely introverted and express with the world beautifully. It is your intention that changes. So an extrovert is one who looks for pleasure outside. An introvert is one who looks for pleasure inside. External pleasures can never satisfy you for a long period of time. Internal pleasures, that is one companion that's always going to be there. And the deeper you go, the longer lasting are the pleasures. So therefore, when you say, is being both extrovert and introvert a good thing in life? Depends what you're looking for. If you're looking for peace of mind, go introvert. If you're looking for a roller coaster ride of life, go extrovert. So being both, not necessary, because you can be introverted and relate beautifully with the world. You know exactly how to express because you know what the world needs. If you're extrovert, you don't read the room because you're so busy focusing on outside, you don't actually think what is the need of each person, how to adapt, how to think. So I hope that's okay, Lakshmi.
I think also, Sudhakar, the biggest challenge that I've found with being introvert is that it's easier to fight others than fighting with yourself, you know. So when you have to deal with your insecurities, when you have to understand that like anger is a sign of insecurity or is a sign of weakness, it's harder to accept that, you know. So to fight with your own issues, with your own fears as an individual, it's much harder and it takes a longer time to deal with, and it takes longer then to see the returns and the reward. Whereas to go extrovert, get that validation outside is quicker, where you get around friends and all sort of other things that makes you feel better, though it's temporary. That is much easier. So the biggest fight, if you ask me, that I have found is when I had to deal with myself more than fighting with other people.
And that is why there are so many extroverts and so few introverts. And that's why there's so many people looking to the world for pleasure and so few people looking to the spirit, the self, for bliss. Because it is much easier to be extrovert. It is instant. There's a satisfaction, whether you're fighting or you're pleasing others, there's an immediate satisfaction. It's easy. It's right outside. But it is so much more difficult to be introvert, to go within. It needs a different type of training. It needs a different type of courage. Because to see dirt outside, relatively easy. To see dirt on yourself, a little bit more difficult. It's closer to you. To see dirt on your lens of your eye, more difficult. To see dirt in your mind, the lens of the lens, even more difficult. And that's the dirt that we're talking about. And then the lens of the mind is, anybody? Your vasanas. To take care of the seed of your personality, the vasanas, and change there. So much more effort. It is much easier to just go and clean a table. But it stays with the table. But you clean here, everything gets cleaned, including the whole world. You clean your mind, you clean your vasanas, you clean up the whole world. That's why Swami Vivekananda says, you conquer the mind, you conquer the world. That brings us to the end of our session, everybody. And keep in mind that if you can, we have a retreat coming up for students like yourself. It is at the end of June, the 30th of June to the 5th of July. And hopefully some of you will be able to join us. We have a few people from our tours that will also be coming. So online is one aspect, but I can't see your faces. And many of you, I recognize the names. Some of you, I don't think we've met in person. So see, if it's not this year, make it a priority. Come to a place where in those 6 days, you can get some good momentum for your evolution. So it's the Vedanta Academy experience. It's the 30th of June to the 5th of July. Okay. Thank you, everybody.